Okay, I think we're live. Today we're going to learn chapter 50. With God's help, we'll learn the entire thing. So there was a famous, how do you call someone who reads handwriting? Like that interprets handwriting.
Oh,
I know in Hebrew it's a grapholog, like a grapholog, okay,
apologist?
graphologist.
Well, graph means writing.
Anyhow, there was a famous Israeli graphologist um, who was commissioned by the Israeli president Zalman Shazar, was came from a Chabad family, and he had access to one of the handwritings of handwritten document of the Alter Rebbe. He commissioned her, with the Rebbe's permission, to read, interpret the handwriting, and she wrote a report about it. And her summary basically was that this was a person that embodied two extreme opposite poles being drawn in two opposite directions that an average person wouldn't be able to withstand. She describes a little bit of what in her estimation this pole is. That there's an again, I don't know how well educated she was in the ideas that Alter Rebbe spoke about, but basically that on the one hand he was drawn to uh, spirituality, to let go of anything material, and at the same time he had this deep seeding desire to do a favor for another person, to help someone else out in a physical way, in a material way. This these pulls to two opposite directions. And that's what we're going to talk about today, because today, the Alter Rebbe, for the last almost 10 chapters, we've been talking about love and all, because we're talking about emotions. Today, the Alter Rebbe is going to, we're going to learn about the highest or the most extreme type of love. And that will finish this section. The next three chapters are sort of a different subject. It's going to be about the Shekhinah resting in the temple versus if God's everywhere, and why is he specifically in certain places? How does that work? And why is it accessed specifically through doing a mitzvah, etc. So today we're going to finish this we're going to finish dealing. Well, finish dealing. We're going to finish talking about for the first time around emotions. We're going to talk about a love today that is unlike all the other types of love that we've spoken about until now. So I'll open it up with a question. If you have what to share, please do. Um, when you experience, or when you, I don't want to use the term fall in love, but when you start experiencing love towards someone or something, does that take you away from your environment, or does that make you closer to your environment? In other words, not the specific object of your love. Does the love distract you and remove you from the rest of your life, or does the love enhance and strengthen the rest of your life and your surroundings? Do you have any insights? Yes. You learned well enough that if you say yes, you get both.
Yeah.
What do you? So
How do you separate?
what do you mean? How do you separate them?
Separate the idea of the personal emotion. And well, however you put the two alternatives. But it seems to me that it's both. It enhances your own life, and it enhances the life of others.
That was my question. The question was, when you're in love with someone, let's say, are you more in touch or less in touch with all the other things in your life, with your assuming you're a guy who's starting to date, are you less in touch with your parents and your siblings, or more in touch with your parents or your siblings? Are you less in touch with your job and your friends, or are you more in touch with your job or your friends? Does it make you work harder, or does it make you work less because you're distracted and you're not there? So I'm
But I would still say yes,
okay.
that you can walk two paths at the same time. And
Yeah, but you can't be more in touch and less in touch.
but love can it feeds into the normal life.
Okay, you're talking about the generic term love, but I'm asking you to describe, to imagine you being in love. Would that, or when you felt that love, did that enhance your, practically, did it enhance your awareness of everything around you or distract you? It can't do both at the same time. But you're still right. Anyone else want to?
Maybe not at the same time.
Okay.
Not simultaneously, but it's certainly, just from my own experience, my relationship with my wife is one that has been very personal and very, very enriching, but it also has contributed to how I live my life.
So it doesn't distract you from the rest of your life. So
I
then,
think it improved.
right. So why did you say both?
Well, because
You're choosing, but why is it both? It's not distracting you from the rest of your life. It's encouraging you and making you work better and harder and stronger and happier and you're more pleasant to be around. If anything, it's when you're in love. When you're in love, when you're feeling in love, you're pleasure to be around. Yeah. So does everyone agree that it's usually that side? Okay, so the reason I said you're right and it's yes is because I think we can separate and make a distinguish within love two types of love. On average, the average love you will feel in your lifetime will usually make you happier, skip a step, more likable. You'll want to engage with your surround. It'll make you more attuned to and more excited to be there for others, to be understanding, to be helpful, to be productive. Yeah. Generally speaking, love builds you up, makes you stronger. But for the sake of our conversation, we're going to call this a quiet love. Because the love quietly, subtly works within you and it can literally change you, but it doesn't do it in a flamboyant way. It doesn't do it in a very expressive way, but it can utterly change you. It can completely change who you are and how you operate, but it's quiet. For the sake of our conversation. That doesn't mean it can't get loud, but for the sake of our conversation, it's quiet. The reason I'm saying it's quiet is because I want to contrast it with a love that's very loud. And this love is not necessarily experienced by every person, and it's definitely not experienced very often. But there are times in a person's life where it's possible for them to experience such an immense, intense emotion of love that the whole world becomes quiet. They lose track of everything. This may be expressed when young people fall in love with each other, but usually that doesn't last long, and it's not necessarily real. It's probably more infatuation, but it does mimic, it does mirror, it does sort of mimic. It does mimic love, and a parent, maybe the first time they have a child that's born, suddenly they're not eating a whole day, they're just on a high. They don't even feel their hunger. They'll forget. They'll be busy calling people that forget to call their best friend just because their head isn't here. It's invested in in the object of their love at this moment. This is a very loud love. It's a tumultuous love. It's a love that's burning like a flame. It's excited. This type of love consumes everything around it. It doesn't have space for anyone around it. When you fall in love with someone, suddenly you're not calling your parents or your siblings or your friends because you're busy. Your mind is preoccupied. Let's take this to God. Up until now, the last 8, 9 chapters, we've been talking about love. And I'm going to use a metaphor. I'm going to use an example just because I've seen the contrast and it's easier to see it in someone who either grew up not religious or left religion. And then witnessing their journey to Yiddishkeit, to Torah, to mitzvahs, to Yiddishkeit. Most people, and I say most just because that's what I've experienced. I don't know that if it's 51% or it's 98% or maybe even 49%. I don't know. But I think this is the normal, and when I say normal, I mean the average. And most people that come close to Judaism do it in a way that it's quiet. What do I mean by that? I mean, they take on a mitzvah. It makes them, in many ways, more involved in their community, in their family, even if their family isn't holding up with them. But they're more understanding, tolerant, etc. Every once in a while, you have what's called a Baal Tshuva, someone who's coming closer to Yiddishkeit, and they're on such a high, they're so passionate that if something ends up in their way, it's broken without even realizing it. Suddenly they're not talking to their parents because the parent made a remark, and then now that's it, they're focused, right? They're so focused on certain mitzvahs that they don't even realize all the other mitzvahs that are going on. It's very, very intense. Now, it's not necessarily a bad thing. On the contrary, this type of love, if you will, is a much greater love in the sense that you're much more connected to the object of your love when you're totally disconnected from everything else. You're not distracted. Yeah. But these are the two types of love that a person has. Again, a tzaddik can have this type of love, but it's more visible. You see it more in someone that's new to Judaism or new to observance. They're excited. There are two types of excitements. One is an excitement that puts a smile on their face, and one is an excitement that makes them very serious, very intense, very serious, very not necessarily pleasant to be around, if you will. Yeah. According to Kabbalah, by the way, Hillel and Shammai represent these two modes. Shammai was a man of gevura, yeah. Someone came and makes a remark that he doesn't take kindly to. He says, "Get out of here. I don't have time for you. I'm busy. There's more important things." Hillel says, "No, if I'm going to be religious, if I'm going to be close to God, let me take the time and let me have the patience to help the people around me." It's two types of love. It's a loud love or a quiet love. According to Kabbalah, this quiet love, which incorporates all the loves we've spoken about till now. We've spoken about a love that comes from meditation, a love, ahavat olam, ahava rabbah, right? Love of a reciprocal love, a love of a father to a son. All these different types of loves that we spoke about in the last number of chapters are all loves that are tamed, are quiet. These loves are referred to in Kabbalah, generally speaking, when we want to refer to love, we refer to it as water. Just like water is naturally goes down from its place to some destination, love draws you closer naturally. It's also referred to as chesed, kindness. Yeah, because love is what causes you to be kind. Whether it's because you love the thing you're kind to, or because you're generally feeling a feeling of love. So now suddenly you're kind. Yeah, it says a father on the day of his youngest or his only daughter, or his youngest daughter's wedding, he gives charity with the same passion to people he doesn't know as the people he knows, because he's just in a loving mode. So giving is a natural result. In the Jewish people, the priests, the Kohen, is generally speaking referred to as the Ish HaChesed, the man of kindness. When they bless the Jewish people, the Birkat Kohanim, the priestly blessings, the blessing they say is that God commanded them to bless the Jewish people be'ahava, with love. What's the famous saying from Aaron that's in Perkei Avot? Remember? In chapter 1? Hillel said, be of the students of Aaron, Ohev Shalom, Rodev Shalom, he loved peace, he chased peace. Ohev et Habriot, loved creatures, creations. Umekarvan LaTorah, bring them close to Torah. And then, many times in Kabbalah, love is referred to kesef, which is silver. First of all, the word kesef in Hebrew also means, in Tehillim, you have a few times it says nitzfa, that King David is speaking about his longing, his yearning, his falling in love with God. He uses the root of kesef. Kesef is also very shiny, reflective, and whitish, which is like chesed, which is kindness, is the color that's associated with it is white. So right here at the beginning, the Alter Rebbe is first going to lay down what we spoke about till now. Just the first few lines. He's going to tell us up until now was all this quiet type of love. Okay, we'll start at the bottom of 773, chapter 50. All the forms and levels of love mentioned above derive from the right side, from the level of Kohen, for a Kohen is called a man of kindness. Meaning that his form of serving God comes under the category of chesed. They are called kesef hakadoshim, a longing for holy things. Kesef hakadoshim literally means the money of the temple that is holy. As in the words, you sorely longed for your father's home. Where the Hebrew word for longed is etymologically related to the word kesef. See, in the Hebrew it's nichsof nichsafta. So everything we spoke about till now is this level of love that's usually it's related to kindness, to silver, to Kohen. Yeah? However, in contrast to this silver love, to this quiet love, there is a loud love. There is a passionate love. In Song of Songs, there's a verse that says that love is as strong as death. Rishpeha, its flames are like the flames of fire. What's the connection between love and fire, or between love and death? But this type of love is a love that's referring to someone who recognizes the truth of godliness. When someone sees the reality of this world, that really it's just an act, an expression of godliness, would you want to engage with the physical part of the world or with the spiritual part of the world? I'll give you a simple example. Most people have a natural desire, a natural inclination to mate with someone of the opposite gender. This is the nature God put in to human beings, generally speaking. This creates a big problem. The problem is that there are many restrictions. And you can't do it with whomever, whenever. So we have two opposing feelings, right? When a boy or girl set out to date and get married, what's attracting them to marriage? So for women, the Torah generally understands the women want to have kids. That's why the mitzvah to have kids was given to Adam, to men, because the women don't need the mitzvah. The men, if they weren't given the commandment, wouldn't get married. So what did God put in the male? What inclination did God put in the male to cause him to get married? He didn't just give him a mitzvah, because a mitzvah itself, not everyone does the mitzvahs. God created an inclination that we should want to be with a woman. But is that why you should get married? Is that why you should marry this woman? Because you want to be with a woman? No. But if God doesn't give you that inclination, you won't end up with one. Right? Okay, so now you dated, you decided she looks good, she seems nice, we seem to get along, we get married. We're little kids, we don't really know each other. And in the beginning, what's attractive in the marriage to me might be just the fact that now I'm with a woman. But eventually, the longer we live together, the more we couple together, the more we parent together, the more we get to know each other, the more we get to know what's beneath the surface. If you had to choose between marrying your physical spouse or marrying your spiritual spouse, in other words, their personality, their identity, what would you choose? Hopefully you would choose a spiritual. Obviously, it doesn't mean your inclination to the physical is gone, but we look at the world, we see fruit. They look juicy, they look sweet, they look good. Our body wants to eat it. But if we saw the reality that what's the fruit really? It's an extension of God's imagination, of God's speech. It's really a piece of godliness that's waiting to be uncovered and elevated, to be reunited with God, so to speak. Would you want to eat the apple? Well, you want to eat the apple because you want this spark of God to be reunited with God. But you'd much more prefer not being able to eat than just being one with God. When you see the reality of what's there, when you see what's beneath the surface, suddenly the external part doesn't exist anymore. So you fall in love with God when you recognize the reality of what it is, and suddenly the whole world can go to hell. So I'm not even paying attention to the rest of the world. I'm trampling. I just want to be one with God. Why do I need to engage the physical world? It's only a distraction. This is the fiery love, the loud love, the love that makes the person just want, his soul wants to leave the body, just wants to become one with God. That's the connection between love and death. Because this type of love, King Solomon understood, could lead to death. We've had this in history. You know who died because of love? According to Kabbalah and the Torah, there are two people that died out of love. It says, Nadav and Avihu, Aaron's sons. Why did they die? It says, Bekarvasam lifnei Hashem, because they came close to God, vayamusu, and they died. They weren't supposed to. They weren't called upon. But in this week's Torah portion, we learn about Aaron's death, and it says God kissed him. All right? It says God gave him a kiss and he died. What does that mean? In other words, God allowed him to express the love to the point that his soul just left the body, became one. So this type of love is an extreme yearning for the soul to become one with God. And if left untethered, will become one with God. Ben Azai. You ever heard of Ben Azai? Ben Azai was one of the Mishnaic sages. It says 4 people went into the orchard and they had different results. Rabbi Akiva went in well and came out well. It says Ben Azai, he looked, he was affected, and he died. Also, Ben Azai, it says, wasn't married. Either he never got married or he divorced, because he said, Nafshi chashka b'Torah, my soul desires Torah too much. I don't have space to be married. He's one-track minded. When he went into the orchard, he went into the mystical worlds, he looked, and he had nothing that was tethering him down, nothing holding him back. In Kabbalistic words, the Alter Rebbe is going to use these words. Words are used very often in Hasidus. This direction is called Ratsui. Ratsui can come from the term Ratz, running, or Ratzon, desire, a will. But this is where I'm running towards what's drawing me, what I'm in love with. Now, the quiet love was compared to water. This love is compared to fire. The quiet love is compared to chesed. This love is compared to gvura. Now, gvura is usually fear, awe. However, chesed has within it gvura, a type of chesed that's expressed in a more strong-handed way. And this is, right, when love is fire, fire can burn, can destroy. So there's an element of destruction in it that it has, even though at the same time it's giving warmth and light, but it's also destroying. It's also gvura. In people, this is not the Kohen, but the Levi. We'll soon see why. That the Alter Rebbe will discuss in a minute. And we said the quiet love is silver, the loud love is gold. First of all, gold is the color of fire. It's also more rare, but more expensive. This type of love is more rare. It's not the average person can't disconnect from everything in their life besides the one object of their love. Every once in a while it happens, or every once in a while it'll happen for a specific amount of time or for a specific person or object. You'll get, some people are, their brains are wired differently. They get a toy or a gadget, that's it. They're gone. They get a book, you don't see them for the next 2 days. They don't eat, they don't sleep, they don't do anything. They're gone. 2 days later, they show back up to reality. For those 2 days, there was nothing in their world besides that book, besides that toy, besides that gadget. So it could happen where someone can become so hyper-focused to the exclusion of everything else. But that's gold, because it's a lot more powerful. At the same time, it's a lot more rare. Doesn't happen as often. Okay, let's see this. The Alter Rebbe introducing this type of love here. Bottom of 774. There is, however, another level of love which excels all these aforementioned levels, as gold is superior to silver. And this is a love like glowing coals of fire. And now we're gonna lose you for a minute. He has a few lines here of explanation. A burning love, unlike the aforementioned forms of love, which are essentially like water. For the soul is drawn with a yearning toward God like water which flows and is attracted in a certain direction. Hence, in the wording of the prayer, for rain said on Shemini Atzeret, remember our forefather who was drawn after you like water, right? Which is Avram. This love, on the other hand, has a totally different quality. The love that we're going to talk about now has a totally different quality, that of glowing coals of fire. Okay, where does this love come from? This derives from the level of the higher Givorot, of the higher Bina. In other words, the source of this love is from the level of Gvura and Bina. Why? Or where do we see this? How does it express itself? This arousal of this love comes about through meditation on the greatness of the Infinite One, before whom all is considered as absolute nothingness. When you realize that, when you become one with this realization, then the soul becomes inflamed and flares up toward the precious splendor of his greatness in order to gaze upon the glory of the King. This is the content of this love. In other words, that becomes the whole focus of the love. To spend another minute, to get another glance, to get another peek. One more look, one more moment, one more touch, one more conversation. It is like glowing fiery coals of a mighty flame, which surges upward. Not a love which is drawn towards some object, but one which ascends with the burning fire of kalot hanefesh, of the consumption of the soul, where the soul is totally consumed. In other words, it's consumed within God, and it ceases to exist as an independent entity, as being alive. And it strives to be parted from the wick and wood on which it has taken hold. Right? In other words, the soul comes into the body. We said the body is the wick, the candle, and the neshama is the fire that's on, right, the neshama. So here, when the person recognizes the reality of God's greatness and the fact that he's technically a part of God and can be one with God, the fire of his soul becomes so strong that all it wants to do is disconnect from the fire, wants to disconnect from the wick. By the way, you can see this and try it at home, where you can take like a Havdalah candle, a torch, and then take a little match next to it, put it close to the fire but not touching, and you'll see that the little flame will start arcing towards the torch, and if you get close enough, it can actually extinguish the flame of the smaller match. If you know how to do it correctly, it can actually the fire can literally leave the match, the smaller part, and become consumed within the torch, in the bigger fire. In the physical world, the sun is seen as the root, as the source of fire. So fire by nature wants to be consumed within its source, and that's why fire is constantly striving to go up. This results from the predominance of the element of divine fire that is in the divine soul, unlike other forms of love which derive from the element of water in the divine soul. And from this, in other words, from this love of fire, the soul comes to a thirst, right? When you're on fire, now you become very thirsty. Just as in the physical domain, one becomes thirsty when the element of fire predominates, so it is in the spiritual domain too. The ascendancy of the divine soul's element of fire creates a thirst within the soul. As it is written in Tehillim, my soul thirsts for you. That's the first step. Then it reaches the level of love sickness, where the soul is sick with the love of God, just as an unquenched physical thirst brings on a state of sickness. We say this, you know where we say this? No, cholas ahava. It's not it's different pronouns. We say it in Yedid Nefesh. Nafshi cholat ahavatecha. My soul is lovesick with you. It's sick because it's in love. So first it gets thirsty, then it becomes so thirsty and you can never quench this thirst until it becomes one with God. So it becomes so thirsty that it actually becomes sick. And then if it stays sick for long enough, And then it comes to a virtual expiring of the soul, kalot hanefesh, as it is written, and my soul expires. If not for the consequent contrary sensation of retreat and restraining oneself, as explained further, the soul would literally expire. Okay, so right now we just described rotzoi. Again, rotzoi is this yearning for the soul to leave the body, to become one with its source. Now, we mentioned that chesed, that the quiet love is connected to Kohen, and the loud love is connected to the Levi. Why? So, generally speaking, music, not just instrumental music, but also vocal music, song, in Jewish literature is called the pen of the soul. Melody is a way for the soul to express itself, sometimes in ways that the body cannot express in words. The soul can sing a melody that expresses feelings that can't be articulated in words. Yeah? I'm sure you've had that experience, or possibly where you've heard a song that just you related not necessarily to the words, sometimes to the words, but even more to the melody. It just spoke your language for some reason.
Like a nigun?
Yeah, so in Chassidus, that's a very big part. There are two types of nigun. There's, generally speaking, there's a upbeat melody, which is referred to either a nigun simcha, a nigun of joy, or a nigun hitva'adut, a nigun of a farbrengen, or a nigun for Shabbos and Yom Tov, like a festive song. And then there is a nigun of yearning. It's called nigun ga'aguim, of yearning. And what's the difference between these two songs? These two songs are expressing the soul in two different ways. On the one hand, you have the rotzoi, this love, this desire to become one with God, to leave your physical existence. But then the opposite of rotzoi, or the counter to rotzoi, is shuv. Shuv means to return. The minute before you expire because you're so lovesick with God, you remember, wait a second. But what did God tell me to do? God told me to stay here and put on tefillin and eat kosher and learn Torah, and I work 6 days a week and give tzedakah. So where am I going? Because I'm in love with God, therefore I'm going to do what he didn't want me to do. I love my wife, so I'm going to buy her something that she doesn't like because I like it. It makes me feel good. Who does that? Shuv is the return back to reality. Now, I don't want to be here. I want to be there. But because I want to be there so much, I want to be here. But only because that's what he wants, not because I want. If it's up to me, I want to be there. But I know I have to be here. And therefore I want to be here, but only because I know I have to be here. I know that's what he wants me to do.
I'd be in two places at once.
Oh, so you can't be in two places at once, but and therefore there are times when we focus on one versus the other. During prayer, we're more focused on the feelings of love and wanting to connect to God. But then at the same time, in the Amida, when we're literally standing in front of God, we ask for our physical needs. We never allow ourselves to go too much to the extreme, because if we go too much to the extreme, we can either lose our life, or we could become so consumed in the material that we forget the purpose of it all. We need to have both of these feelings, rotzui and shuv. Those are the mystical Hasidic terminologies that describe these two. And this was the service of the Levi. The Kohen was a man of kindness, but he was a quiet love. He was a love that didn't risk losing his life. That was a love that made him engage in society. I mean, Aaron, you know what? The men, it says, mourned Moses. Who mourned Aaron? You know what it says? It says, Kol B'nai Yisrael, the Jewish men, the sons of Israel mourn Moses. For Aaron, it says, Kol Beis Yisrael, the whole house of Israel, the women also. Because Aaron was a very personable guy. He'd go around, he'd make sure everyone was doing well. It says he'd bring peace between husband and wife and between friends, between business partners. He was very much a people's person. He was a love that drew him closer to the reality around them. The Kohen doesn't risk. The Levi sings, on the one hand, these songs of immense desire and devotion to God that risk his soul leaving his body, but they also sang songs of joy, songs that represented the understanding, no, but I meant to be here. I have a mission to do here. The Alter Rebbe is going to say that really, in order to experience this, not everyone can experience this type of love, because the only way you can experience this type of love is if you truly don't care about anything else. This type of love can't coexist with even a draw towards something other than the object of this love. If you're drawn to something more, and not more, but to something else, even a small amount in addition to this, then you're not 100% in love with this, with whatever it is you're feeling. So it's really almost technically impossible for us to actively, sometimes it'll happen by default, but it won't last that long. Yeah, we'll get a book after 2 days, that's it, the rest of the world comes into existence again. We get hungry enough and tired enough that now I have to fall asleep, now I have to go to sleep, or I have to eat, right? Eventually it comes to an end. So we can't really experience this in its purest way. Let's see how Alter Rebbe describes this. From here, from the level of in the middle of 778. From here, from the level of the higher Gevurot of the higher Bina, is derived the source of the divine service of the Levites below in this world. Now, in the future, when the world will be elevated, they will be the Kohanim. Unlike now, when the Levites are secondary to them, as it is written, they shall accompany you and serve you. So now, today's day and age, the priests serve in the temple. The Levites are there to serve the priests. As our master, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, the Arizal of blessed memory, commented on the verse, but the Kohanim, the Levites, that the Levites of today will become the Kohanim of the future. What does that mean? The Torah doesn't change. It also says, for example, like we said before, Shammai is Gevura, right? Shammai is fire, whereas Hillel is kindness, is water. Today, the law is like Hillel in almost all our disagreements. The Arizal says when Mashiach comes, the law will be like Shammai. What does that mean? The Torah is going to change. We're told the Torah doesn't change. But today, that higher level love is only secondary to the Kohen level love, because the Kohen level love is the level of love that's common, that's accessible, that's relatable. So today, the Levi love is seen as secondary. In other words, it's not as prevalent and it's not as accessible. But when Mashiach comes, that will be the highest level. And that's why it says the Levi will be the Kohen. What does it mean? It doesn't mean that the Levi will suddenly light the menorah in the temple and go into the Holy of Holies. The Torah won't change. Only the Kohen will be able to do it. But the Levi will be on a higher level than the Kohen. That's what it means. The Levi will be the Kohen of now. Their roles, their positions on the hierarchy will swap, will switch. Okay? This is a side note. Let's continue. On page 780. The Levite service of God was to raise their voice in melody and thanksgiving, with song and music, tunefulness and harmony. Music characteristically combines varied and even opposite moods. Some serious, stemming from Gevurah, and others happy, stemming from Chesed. Their music, notice the music of the Levi progressed in a manner of advance and retreat. Ratzoi, literally running, and Shuv, returning. Okay, so these are advance and retreat. Ratzoi and Shuv. These are the two opposite feelings that a person is meant to have. This echoed their form of serving God, the headlong advance toward kolot nefesh, but not letting the body actually expire. Right before you get there, right before you get to the edge of the cliff, and the restraint, the retreat and return from that point. Such is the nature of this intense love, like the flame that flashes out of the buzzock, as is mentioned in the Gemara in Chagiga chapter 2. I wonder if it's lightning. Anyway, no, Barak is thunder. Here's something that Alter Rebbe, you wouldn't expect to see it in Tanya, because remember, what's Tanya? Tanya is how it's accessible to us, right? That was the whole verse Tanya started on, is how accessible it is to befich in your mouth and your heart and to do it in thought, speech, and action. How accessible it is, right? Here, Alter Rebbe says something that's very uncommon. It is impossible to explain this subject clearly in writing. Yet, every person with a feeling heart, in other words, who has perfection of heart, in other words, he is in touch and controls the feelings of his heart, who is understanding in that he uses his faculty of bina, and intelligent in grasping a subject by using his faculty of chachma, and delves deeply to attach his mind and understanding to God by using his faculty of das, will find the goodness and light concealed within his intelligent soul, each according to his capacity. In other words, if you use all your intellectual capacities to recognize the greatness of God, and you have a feeling heart, in other words, your thought process can control and can create the feelings in your heart. This can lead to some interesting places. One is affected in one way from one type of meditation, and one is affected in another way by a different form of meditation. However, this comes after prefacing this meditation by fear of sin, the fear of doing wrong by sinning, in order to become utterly removed from evil, withholding oneself from doing any wrong, to avoid your transgressions interposing between you and God, God forbid. In other words, if someone doesn't first have the fear of sin, then your love to God could be in such a way that you're like, oh, I'm so in love with him, he won't care if I don't do this or I don't do that. No, the only way to love God so intensely is to despise evil as intensely. It's not enough to avoid evil. You have to despise it. If you're not against evil, then you can't really be wholeheartedly in love with God. Because if you don't hate what's fighting your lover, then you don't really love them. If there's an existential threat to your lover and you don't hate this existential threat, you won't do everything in your power to eliminate this existential threat, then you don't really love this person. Sin, impurity is an existential threat, not to God, because God created impurity and evil, but it's an existential threat to the revelation of godliness in the world. So if I don't despise that and shun that and abhor impurity and evil, then I don't really fully love God, which is what makes it so difficult. And this is the service of a tzaddik. A tzaddik is one who's in love with God. The lower level of tzaddik, which is majority of tzaddikim, are the quiet love, because they don't despise evil to that extreme. And then there are the select few, that the tzaddik gomor, the complete tzaddik, that's totally infatuated with God to the extent that anything that's even suspected to be a threat to God becomes one that he despises. By the way, just the Rebbe once, before we finish, the Rebbe once told a story of, have you ever heard of Hasidic groups that have a lot of songs? Okay, Chabad is one of them, but there's another Hasidic group that's known to have probably maybe even more songs. No, Mojits. Mojits. Google Mojits. I don't know. It's a Russian word, a Polish word, whatever. Google will figure out what you mean. Just write the Nigunim of Mojits. maybe like MODJ, Mudgets, like I don't know. It'll figure it out. So the Mudgets Rebbe, he lived before the war, and he was elderly and ill, and he once went, I think, to Berlin to be seen by a expert doctor, and he was told that in order to take care of this, they'll need to operate, but his heart is too weak to withstand. They didn't have anesthesia or whatever to withstand the operation. So he said, it's not a problem. Just I'll start singing a song, and you'll be able to tell when I'm so engrossed in the song, you can operate, nothing will happen. And that's what happened. It was so, and you listen to some of the melodies that he composed, you'll understand how someone could get lost in melodies like that. The Rebbe spoke about this as being a modern day, even though modern days before the war, and he was a special person, but where you see that a person can become so focused on a spiritual matter that they could literally, and by the way, to some extent, we can experience this ourselves. Every once in a while, you're so engrossed in something, you'll get hurt and you won't realize you're hurt, right? Mm-hmm. Why? Because you're just so involved in something else, you don't even notice it. Maybe not to that extreme, where you could totally disconnect from your body in that type of way. Okay. So we learned about this fiery love that creates this ratzui. What was the words? I want to remember the English words he used for advance and retreat. Okay. This feeling of advancing towards God can, if we take it to its furthest degree, can separate us from this world, can stop us from doing God's will. Yeah. And that was the problem with Nadav and Avihu and Ben Azai. They took it too far. They died as a result. Yeah. And it's not a good thing. It was considered a sin, even though it was a representation of how spiritual and holy they were. Suicide is murder. And that's sort of what they did, whether knowingly or not. They were sort of somewhat aware of that. And they didn't stop themselves from going all the way. That's why whenever you have this advance, this feeling of advance in you, we always have to have a feeling of return in order to tame that feeling of advance and not to let it go too far. But at the same time, we need the feeling of advance. You can't ignore, you can't say, you know what, if this feeling of ratzui might lead me to kalos hanefesh, to expiring of the soul, maybe I just shouldn't feel it. I shouldn't think about the love to God because then I'm in danger. No, because then if you don't think about that side of the equation, you'll start getting involved in the world and then you'll get lost in the world because you'll forget why you're here. As long as you have this pull in both directions, sure, it can become painful because you're being thrown in opposite directions all the time, but it keeps you grounded. It keeps you in the middle. You're being pulled to two sides. By the way, an example of these two types of love is when you have two magnets. They come together and now they're quiet. They're stuck together. There's almost nothing that can take them apart, but they're quiet. Then you have the love of fire, where you bring fire and it catches onto a piece of wood. It becomes one with the wood. Yeah? But this is a unity that's loud. It's making noise. It's moving. It's passionate. It's consuming the wood. Or any material, any flammable material, any fuel that you give the fire. Yeah? It's two types of love. But we need that type of love. Because if not, we'll get lost. Okay. So we need both draws. By the way, this is really Judaism. This is the whole story of Yiddishkeit, right? We have a mitzvah to love God, to give up our life for God, and at the same time, you got to do a mitzvah. You got to live in the material world. Rabbi Akiva left his house for 24 years to go learn Torah, but then he came back to his wife. He asked permission before he left. He wasn't like Ben Azai that divorced the world. But 24 years, he devoted to Torah. He had this desire his whole life to give up his life to God. Right when he was killed by the Romans, he said his whole life he was yearning for the day that he'll be able to sacrifice his life for God. But he didn't voluntarily go and do it. He knew he had a job to do. He had both of these draws, both of these pulls. And Alter Rebbe is going to use this to explain a contradiction that we have in Ethics of Our Fathers. We just read this week, I think. It says in Ethics of Our Fathers two, or maybe this coming week, it says two opposite statements in the same Mishnah. It says in the same sentence, it says al karchach atachai and al karchach atames. Against your will, you're alive, and against your will, you die. In other words, you're born against your will, you die against your will. And all the commentaries wonder, what does that mean? If you say against your will, you're born, in other words, what we're saying is the soul doesn't want to be born, doesn't want to come down. So then if it doesn't want to come down, it should be the easiest thing to get it to die. But no, it doesn't want to die either. How do both of those things coexist? Let's see how the Alter Rebbe explains. The order, on top of 782, the order of one's divine service through occupation with Torah study and mitzvahs, which is the life of a Jew, a service deriving from this intense love, is possible only in a manner of retreat. In other words, when the soul withholds itself from expiring in order to fulfill the divine intent, which can only be realized when the soul remains within the body. As it is written in Sefer Yetzirah, if your heart hastens, return to one. In other words, if your heart hastens, the first part of that verse refers to the craving of the soul that is in the right side of the heart, the abode of the divine soul. When this craving predominates and bursts into flame and glows in such rapture that the soul is consumed with a desire, kolos hanefesh, to pour itself out into the embrace of its Father, its source, who gives one life. And what does it want to do? To leave its confinement in the corporeal and physical body to attach itself to Him, blessed be He. When you feel your soul getting there, then one must take to heart the teaching of our sages of blessed memory. Despite yourself, you must live. Despite your craving for expiry in kolot hanefesh, you must nevertheless remain alive. That's, again, going back to the beginning of that second paragraph, if your heart hastens, return to one. If you feel your heart expiring, return to one. In other words, to what God wanted you to do, as we'll soon see, in this body, to keep it alive, for the purpose of drawing down the higher life force from the light of life. Blessed be He. From the life of life, blessed be He, to the life-giving Torah. Through this, there will be a dwelling place in the lower worlds and created beings for His blessed oneness in a revealed state. As explained above, that this is the ultimate divine intent. In chapter 36, 37, that a human being's service of God should make of the world a dwelling place for Him. And this is the meaning of return to the one. Retreat from your love of God in a state of kolos hanefesh. Doesn't mean stop loving God, but retreat from that state of burning love where your nefesh wants to be consumed for the sake of the one, for the sake of revealing God's oneness in the world, because God has a purpose for you. His purpose is that you should do a mitzvah with the physical object and uncover His oneness, His unity in this world. And as is explained in the Holy Zohar, that there be one in one, meaning that the unity which is hidden, the one of a higher spiritual world or level, shall become an aspect of the revealed world, becoming manifest in the oneness of a lower world or level. It's 12 o'clock. Can we do the last few paragraphs? Okay. And this is the meaning of the text, come my beloved, right? Lecha dodi lekras kala. Yeah? To meet the bride, kala, denoting kolot hanefesh. Kala is the same word, same root as kolot, being etymologically related. In this form of love of the love of God, one's kolot hanefesh should be expressed through causing my beloved to come. In other words, through drawing down the beloved one, God Himself, so that godliness will be revealed in this nether world. Yeah, so that's what I mean. L'chadodi, l'kras kala. Yes, I want to be consumed with God, but not that my soul should leave, but that I should bring God's awareness down into a revealed way so my body can become one with God. Not that my body should be separated and be left behind. With this one, we will be able to understand the saying of our sages of blessed memory, despite yourself. In other words, even against your will, you must live. And despite yourself, you must die. What then should one's desire be? Should you want to live or die? Which one? The Mishnah tells us in other words, despite yourself you should live, and despite yourself you must die. So which one should I want? Which one should I yearn towards? This is explained elsewhere at length with reference to this Mishnah. Despite yourself you must live with the help of the life of life, blessed be he, who enables one to cope with this compulsion to live despite yourself. In other words, your natural desire should be rotzo, you should be to advance, to become one with God. But once you meet God, so to speak, and God says, I want you to reveal me down here, now suddenly your desire becomes to live. And now the soul doesn't want to go back. Now the soul doesn't want to die anymore. Even though theoretically it would rather be up there, but it understands how much more it can accomplish and how much more it can become one with God and reveal God's will when it stays here and does what God asked of it to do. There's a lot to summarize. I think we'll pause here. Next week we're starting something a whole different idea, but I think this sort of brings us to a culmination, but that although the most important thing is the mitzvah, because without the mitzvah you got no connection, but without the emotions, the mitzvah doesn't go anywhere. The mitzvah stays stuck here, doesn't have wings, doesn't make an emotional connection between you and Hashem, and that is necessary as well, although compared to the mitzvah itself, it's secondary.